Hello and welcome to our bite-sized 30-minute session brought to you in partnership with Snapshots, AusContact's accreditation partner, in which we'll be discussing the factors to consider when setting service level targets in inbound centres. In the spirit of reconciliation, AusContact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of AusContact and your host for today. I'm pleased to introduce our special guest, Jason Locke from Westpac New Zealand, and by now a very familiar presenter, Chief Operating Officer of Snapshots, Deepak Selvaratnam. We have a lot to share. However, if you have a burning question, please ask using the Q&A button on the control panel. And if we have time, we'll ask it at the end of the bite. If we don't, to get your question answered and you're anonymous, we can't do it. So please make sure you identify who you are. If you're having technical issues, please note that on the control panel, you can click the raise hand button and the AusContact team will rush to your aid. Or you can revert to your confirmation email with the link to the webinar, and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes are available there for you. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. And let's introduce our guest speaker first. Jason Locke, Head of Operations and Contact Centres, Westpac New Zealand. Jason has a passion for opening up financial possibilities for all New Zealanders through great service and core banking solutions. To do this, he supports a team of 800 bankers in high-performing front of house and back of house operations. Jason is accounted a global expert in business process outsourcing and, in particular, contact centre operations, where he has deep domain expertise and has led large-scale operations on 4 continents across banking, finance, logistics, consumer electronics, telco and media industry verticals. Jason is a proud New Zealander who lives in Auckland and has studied marketing and economics with honours at the University of Waikato. And with that, we also welcome that very, very familiar voice, Deepak, who actually requires no introduction. Welcome, Deepak, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Kia ora, everybody. As usual, let me quickly run through what we might cover today. A little bit about us for context, and straight into the topic around factors to consider when we are setting service level targets, especially for inbound centers. And Jason, you will find, is probably one of the leading experts in this space. So you are in for a treat today. We'll have a few Q&A, opportunity for Q&A if possible. Now, a little bit of context for us. The whole idea of these sessions is to provide operational and management folk with a couple of operational and strategic ideas and thoughts drawn from this vast array of data and practices across different centers, to be able to use these data and insights immediately right across their center, and also as a way of improving your own knowledge and developing teams as you go along. So the data we draw from, which is the Snapshots audit and benchmarking tool, which we launched in 2009, comes from over 3,500 customers. And importantly, these benchmarking data that you get is unique in the sense that it is actually validated data. It's not a survey, but actually validated business practices of contact centers across the world. Some of those logos that you saw before, you will realize. Importantly, too, the checklist that you assess yourself against is drawn from globally published standards and government policies and procedures and policies and directions around privacy, around data protection. All of that is very, very important in today's context. So having given you some of that context, let's go straight into the topic. in terms of understanding what factors are to be considered when setting service level targets for inbound centers. To set the scene for Jason, I'd like to draw upon 3 areas of statistics and practices that we are seeing today across centers. So the first of these is that what we found is that there's only 25% of centers that align their business plan or their budgets. Some confuse business plan with a budget, but there are only 25% of us that actually align ourselves to what the corporate or what the organization wants us to do. So the important piece for us to remember as management practitioners in the industry is to ensure that we have, by doing an audit or a SWOT analysis, is to be able to align ourselves to the organization's goals and being proactive. Today, it's pretty important for us to be proactive, so that we actually target the goals of customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and stakeholder satisfaction. Secondly, what's really good for us in the industry is that 87% of us provide clear and measurable objectives for everyone to follow. Now, that's very, very good. It's a good sign and very important. What is also important for us to continue to remember is that as part of this process of providing objectives and operational metrics for everyone, is that we want to encourage participation through the different channels that the organization can provide for us to actually engage with our teams. Very critical, especially when we are working in a distributed environment. And finally, there's a significant amount of agents, frontliners, that feel that the practices that we have within the center are not overly transparent. And there may be different reasons for that, both valid and not so valid. But importantly, what is important for us today, as all of us managing centers will know, is that agents want to feel part of that global vision that we are all heading towards. They need transparency in the way things are done. And once we do that, we've got the ability to actually engage them in this process, ensuring that we build trust amongst them and encourage participation in the goals that we're going towards. So with those 3 statistics, now I think it is time for me to segue right into Jason to give us his thoughts and his actual practices around setting service level targets for inbound contact centers. Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Deepak, much appreciated. Setting a service level for an inbound contact center, and I also like to say resetting, because as Deepak indicated in his introduction there, an annual review of these types of metrics I think is very important. What we're specifically talking about here today is for the inbound contact center, the percentage of calls that are answered within a specific amount of time that's targeted. Now, recently I had a friend in the industry who came to me and he said, look, I need a little bit of advice. My contact center isn't achieving the target service levels. It's showing up in a RAG status that's going up through various senior levels in the organization. It's not looking great. And that's obviously creating a lot of pressure running back through the organization. And the first thing that I said back to him was, well, look, are you clear that your service level is the right one? You know, if it's showing up red, have you re-examined whether or not the service level that you've got is appropriate for your customers and for your organization? And his response perhaps was not surprising, that he said, oh, well, look, we use the industry standard. We're sitting at a target of 80% in 20 seconds, and that's what we go after. But I just don't have the resources to deliver that. And I said, okay, well, look, let's just pause a second, because there isn't really an industry standard that you should be thinking that you need to adhere to. It should be bespoke. It should be unique to your particular organization and specific to your individual customers. Let's talk about that. So the first thing that I talked him through was the notion that just because you answer your calls quickly, it doesn't mean that you're going to have satisfied customers. Satisfaction is determined by other factors beyond how quickly you're answering their calls. But if you're making your customers wait a very long time, they could become dissatisfied customers. All right. So if you're answering your calls quickly, then they're not dissatisfied, probably. If you're answering them slowly, they could be dissatisfied. And the thing that determines whether or not they're not dissatisfied or in fact dissatisfied is their tolerance for a wait. So each customer has a basic tolerance to wait to be supported. And that's a really key dynamic, because that way you know that you don't have to automatically always be reducing that time. There's a diminishing return for the incremental investment that you make in answering those calls more rapidly. There's a bit of a tipping point, if you like, at which point, if you're answering your calls slower than that across a range, you're dissatisfying your customers. So we go to step 2. We really want to know and understand and assess what that tipping point is. What is the amount of time the customer waits, or your set of customers wait in aggregate, beyond which they become dissatisfied? Their tolerance runs out, they're not happy. So I think that assessing that tipping point is absolutely key to informing what your service level should be. And the way that I like to do it is I use both quantitative and qualitative data to try and get a bit of a view of what that tipping point is. So what I'll do is I'll take customer satisfaction survey results, I'll look at abandonment rates, I will assess a number of different factors across the quality or the quantitative results or information that you have within the contact center. I'll look at sentiment scores from speech analytics, and then I'll analyze customer verbatims. And what you do, or what you're looking to do, is you're looking to tag the actual wait time that those customers experienced that drove them to either make that verbatim, provide that customer satisfaction survey result, etc. And then you start to build up a statistical model of where that tipping point might look. Now, in one large-scale contact center operator I ran for a large global media corporation, we did this analysis. We looked at customer satisfaction results, we looked at complaint or verbatims with negative sentiment, we looked at all of those different elements. And what the data clearly showed was that for the majority of interaction types that we manage on behalf of for those customers, the tipping point was 4 minutes, around about 4 minutes. So the tolerant customer for that customer group was, they were fine. They were not dissatisfied up 4 minutes, but beyond that 4 minute mark, you started to see material increases in negative verbatim comments provided in customer satisfaction surveys. You started to see the emotion in the speech analytics tail away, worsen, and you started to see, on average, a lower customer satisfaction score out of 10 dropping by as many as 2 points. That then informed that particular tipping point. Now, it's important to know, I think, that when you're assessing tipping points, that they are variable and they change depending on the interaction type. So certain types of interactions or certain types of reasons that customers call you will have different urgency. So I work in a bank. If a customer's calling because they suspect that they've been the subject of fraud, their tipping or their tolerance is going to be much, much lower than if they're calling for a general transaction inquiry, wanting to set up an automatic payment, something of that nature. So understand that dynamic's really important, and we'll come back to that right at the end of the chat. Along with the quantitative data, I like to mix in qualitative data. I like to speak with stars or agents reps. I like to hear from them. What do you think the customers feel about the wait times? When are you getting, when are you picking up static from the customers when had to wait? What sort of timelines does that look like? And you marry that together to create a bit of an endorsement of the quantitative view that you've got. So once you've kind of understood where that tipping point sits and understand that it is variable and that it is subject to change, then you're moving on a little bit. Step 3, please. What step 3 says is we need to weigh our customer experience ambition, because what I've described there is actually quite a mechanical process. You know, it's about the avoidance of dissatisfaction. It's about looking at quantitative data to form a view around how far we can push the tolerance of a customer before we actually start satisfying them. And actually, none of that is particularly inspirational and nor aspirational. So we've got to have a little bit of a think about what's going to inspire the team. How are we going to let the team of customer service representatives know that actually we support endeavours and that we're going to create an experience for the customer, which means that they've got a high possibility of creating a great outcome for their customers because they're not reaching us in a satisfied state. We also need to think about what sort of message we want to be sending out to market. If we've talked about the fact as an organisation that we want to be world leading, or we want to be best in breed, or that we want to create a unique and courageous customer experience, as lots of organisations quite rightly do, then actually you want to ally your service level objective with that ambition. And that might not necessarily completely align to the tipping point. So that then comes back to, okay, if we said we want to be world class, if we've said we want to be industry leading, where inside the tipping point do we actually want to make that service level assessment, and what sort of messaging do we want to give to the market, and what do we want to be known for? So there's a more aspirational overlay to the quantitative exercise that you undertake in step 2. So for example, that organisation that I referenced earlier that had the tipping point of 4 minutes said, well, that's all very well, but actually we aspire to be known in the market as an organisation that makes things easy for our customers. And we recognise that what you're saying, Jason, the customer tolerance expires after 4 minutes, but we want to be known and we want to be comfortable that actually we're going to be answering our customers rapidly within a minute. So we want you to chase 80% of your calls, or 90% of your calls, or 95% of your calls answered with 1 minute. And then we know that if we come under pressure because we've got lower resource than we anticipated, or we've got a spike in that, we've got that outer limit of 4 minutes before we're starting to burn the goodwill of our customers. And so it became like a secondary or a catch metric that sat outside the customer aspiration that they sought to establish. And then we get to the step 4, which is the hard reality of what it is that we can actually ultimately afford, and is it prioritized? So once we've determined we want to answer, for example, 95% of our calls within 60 seconds, and we do a workforce management exercise, and we use our modelling tool, or we go old school and we use a Poisson function to determine an Erlang-C calculation to determine the number of people that we need to have on queue to be able to deliver that service level outcome. And then we multiply that by the cost of the folks that we're going to need to bring on board in a fully loaded way. Can we afford it or not? Does it match our budget? Well, look, the good news is, if the budget hasn't yet been set or is coming up for a renewal cycle, the exercise of assessing the tipping point, the exercise of being very deliberate about matching the customer experience ambition of the organisation to that service level can go into the budget setting process. Because you can create quite a transparent linkage between how we're going to be impacting and supporting our customers from that tolerance or tipping point perspective, how that aligns to the organisational ambition in terms of change over time, through the workforce management calculation to the number of resources required to deliver a particular budget outcome. And then if all of that still doesn't get you the budget that you need to be able to do it, then you may be in a position where you're actually needing to make a compromise, or you're needing to prioritize an investment in things that can change your tipping point. Right. So I mentioned earlier that a customer might have a higher priority interaction type. Can you create, through the use of technology, a differentiated service strategy where those interaction types or those customer types are answered more rapidly than your general population? So in the bank, if you call me about a fraud-related issue, and I know that because I might have sent you an automated text message saying, we've seen some suspicious activity, that automatically goes into a list in my telephony system, which takes you to the top of the queue, irrespective. So your call is going to be answered with a tolerance of about 3 or 4 seconds if you're a fraud-related caller. So you can create a better customer experience based on those different elements that change the tipping point. And then again, fundamentally, even after all of that, if you're still needing to make a compromise with respect to your service level, you are at least then equipped to be very clear with the stakeholders within your organization about the probable consequences of that from a customer dissatisfaction perspective and from a customer service experience alignment perspective. And it means that there's complete transparency over how the performance of the contact center with respect to wait times might be negatively influencing those core metrics that you've got with respect to customer satisfaction. This is a process that I like to undertake with regular intervals. About annually feels right. To me, sometimes if your business is experiencing significant change, or you've gone through a strategic review and you've got a different orientation, you might do an out of cycle review, but I like to do it annually. I like to confirm the data annually, and then I like to deliberately set a contact center service level objective that aligns with the budget cycle. And so the factors that I primarily contemplate when setting an inbound contact center service. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Fiona?
Thanks, Deepak. Jason, thank you very much. What I love that you talked about today, which AusContact has been saying for a very, very long time, is there is no such thing as an industry standard. The number of times we've spoken to our members and they've said, oh, well, 80-20 is the industry standard. No, it's not. It's what the industry has done historically, and potentially just because we get into our comfort zone, you get a bit Pareto, 80-20, those sorts of things. The other things that I liked that you spoke to is that answering a customer within a reasonable time fundamentally removes or gives the customer one less reason to be dissatisfied. So you need to understand at what point their dissatisfaction is likely to start to happen. Your tipping point that you used in your example of 4 minutes, that is probably the maximum time waiting rather than a target that you would use. So you need to use your calculator to work out what percentage do I need at what period of time that's going to ensure that I don't hit that tipping point. What we do know from analysis is that customers, when you ask a customer how long they've waited, if you compare the empirical data to what they tell you, they will typically tell you they have waited 3 times as long as they actually have waited. So it's interesting how perception influences that. I'm kind of summarising. So abandon rates, when they abandon, and finding the balance against your budget and that you have available or that you're planning to have versus what do you want your brand's image to be? How do you want people to perceive your brand? And don't just check against what your competitors in the same vertical are doing, because you're not being judged against your competitors in the same vertical. You're being judged against everybody your consumers talk to on the same channel. And of course, the last thing, which, I come from a banking background as well, is that we used to offer different service level based on customer value to the bank. And at the time, and we're talking probably 20 years ago, if you were a high value customer, we used to answer you super duper quickly. And if you were a customer that had, say, a transaction account and nothing else was costing us money, you could wait, and you could wait a very, very long time. And then customer life cycle actually came into the situation, and people started to think very differently about somebody who had a transaction account that was going to uni, that could ultimately become a doctor, and you don't want to lose them early on in their life cycle. You want to make sure that you've got them through at least providing a level of service that matches their needs. And of course, interaction types. If someone's got a lost or stolen card or has a fraudulent situation, they need you now, not tomorrow. They need you now. So yeah, absolutely love that piece. We don't have any questions. So Jason, it looks like you've answered everything people want to know. Deepak, what are your thoughts?
Oh, look, I think to all the points that you covered, Fiona, Jason's really nailed that. And that's why he is the operator that he is. What is really unsaid in Jason's presentation was there were a couple of things. First of all, the fact that you actually need to set times, the tipping points based on the transaction type, means that there's a lot of work that you actually need to do underneath. So you actually need to be able to map out and document and measure the different transaction types that happen in our centers. Now, we know that for 68%, I think was the statistic, of organizations or centers don't really have up-to-date mapping of these processes. So when you don't have these, when you don't understand these, you have to rely on the crutch of 80-20. So the question for you here, Jason, is how do you actually do the underground work? What are the things that you do underneath this? And you did talk through some of them, but throw some more light for some of us who want to understand more in terms of going, what are the other constructs that we need to actually start looking at data and qualitative and quantitative data and setting the standards or setting the benchmarks on which we want to drive our corporate image and bring the team along?
Sure. Well, look, I mean, I think part of this is you can use technology, or you can go old school. I'm old, so I like to use a combination. So you're effectively wanting to dispatch every interaction that comes into your center, and you want to do it, which is not difficult for your agents to complete, so that you get a high level of accuracy. I find the best way to do that these days is through speech analytics to automatically disposition your interaction types. But you can certainly do it through drop-down boxes, or as we did it way back in the day, tick boxes. So once you've accumulated that information, and then you've tagged that back to some sort of centralized coding methodology, so that you can track that back to an average handle time through your telephony platform, then you can start to build up a very clear picture of the types of calls that are coming through, and then you can start tagging that back to your quantitative data points that I talked about, your abandonment rates, your customer satisfaction information, etc. So you can start to build up this view not only at an aggregate level, but at an individual interaction type level as well. So you can start to understand where the customer tolerances lie for different interaction types, and as I mentioned, like those, or a term deposit rollover question, or a lending question that typically has a low tolerance. A basic query about account balance might or might not have a high tolerance or a low tolerance. So you start to build up that picture from that perspective. But it does come back to your point about having really good data lineage, being able to connect the various things that you're doing to assess from a data management perspective, so that you can build up these models over time, and you can see how they change, shift as well.
Fantastic, Jason. I hate to say this, we're 3 seconds off the half hour. Deepak, closing thoughts. Thank you so much.
Look, what Jason has demonstrated today is that the contact center is a small part of art, but in reality, it is a science today, and it is a demonstration of how leaders like Jason are taking a scientific approach to managing a critical part of the organization. So thank you, Jason. Thank you for your time and expertise. Thank you, Jess, who's behind the scenes, and Fiona, as always, for a wonderful facilitation piece throughout the session. Thank you once again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Deepak. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today for The Bite. See you next time, and have a great rest of your day, wherever you may be. Bye.
Thank you.